Hi, everyone. My name is Nina Rosien. I'm a clinical dietitian for the Center for Community Health and Prevention. And today I'm going to be making greens and beans.
It's actually what I feel to be a very underrated recipe. My mom made it all the time growing up, and I never was courageous enough to try it. But as an adult, I've really come to appreciate it. It's super quick, super easy, delicious, and then also really packed with nutrition with a lot of things like fiber. And I find some ways to add a little bit more protein in there as well, just to make it a little bit more balanced. So first, I'm going to walk you through the ingredients. So the biggest and main ingredient of greens and beans are the greens and the beans. The greens that I'll be using today are escarole. So I'll give you a little bit of a example. Here we go. This is what the escarole looks like. So for this entire bunch, it was like less than I think $1.80. So it's a good amount of greens that you get for the head of escarole. And escarole is good source of fiber. It's an excellent leafy green, and we're going to be sauteing it a little bit to break it down so it's not so hardy in the recipe, and I'll show you that later on. Another one of the ingredients that we'll be using are the beans, like I mentioned. For this recipe, I use cannellini beans. You can use chickpeas if you'd like, or mix and match if you would like to. I just prefer cannellini beans because they're kind of softer and they really take on any flavor that you put into them. There are some difficulties finding low sodium cannellini beans. So one rule of thumb that I'll give is you can buy the organic version, and they have less sodium than the non-organic version. The organic version is a little bit more expensive, so you kind of want to weigh the priorities there. If you use the regular beans, just be sure to rinse them for about a minute or so and get all the excess sodium out. But if you use the low sodium ones, like the organic ones, you can actually use the beans and the bean juice like I'll be doing today. The next ingredient we'll have is garlic, a couple of cloves of garlic in here. I tend to use a little bit more garlic than normal because I just love garlic, but you can use less if you'd like. And another way to use garlic flavor without using garlic, if you have an intolerance or anything, is that you can actually omit the garlic and then just use a garlic infused oil to top it off afterwards, after everything's done cooking and right when it's before, or right before when you're going to serve it, you can just drizzle a little bit of garlic infused oil on there, and it adds the garlic flavor, but not with the any stomach upset if you have trouble digesting it. And then the last main ingredient that I wanted to talk about, we'll be using a little bit of pepper and olive oil and such too, but I'll be using bone broth, actually chicken bone broth instead of chicken stock. And the reason why I made that switch is because bone broth has a little bit more protein, actually quite a bit more protein than chicken stock. It's a little bit more expensive. So if you want to not focus so much on the protein, you can absolutely go for a cheaper version and get just the regular chicken stock, low sodium. But for the purpose of this recipe, to make it a little bit more protein dense and add a little bit more flavor to it and give it a little bit more depth, I chose the bone broth. And just for about a cup, it's about 9 grams of protein. So this in combination with the beans and then also all the other depths of flavor that we'll be adding, like the garlic and the escarole, it'll really add a really robust and nice warm flavor to the greens and beans. So after I walk you through the ingredients, I'm going to actually now take it to a different level and do kind of the prep work and show you a little bit more about that going into making the recipe. All right, next I'm going to show you how to prep some of the ingredients. And one of the greatest things about greens and beans, this recipe, is that you don't really need to do a lot of prep work. So I did a little bit of taking off the outer papery layer of the garlic right here, you can see. So I'm going to do that with the last clove I have here. Like I said, you can only use you don't need this many cloves of garlic, but I just like the extra garlic flavor. So I tend to do more than asked typically, but feel free to do it to your own taste and your own personal, preference. So I'm just getting that papery layer off this garlic. There's lots of fun ways you can do this. Actually, some people put it in a little Tupperware container like this, and you can put it in there, kind of shake it around, get the paper off. But I just do it the hands-on way like this. And then what we're going to do with these cloves of garlic is we're going to mince them up. That's going to be one of the first things that we put into the recipe. We're just going to saute the garlic first, but this is just kind of how you prep it. So, this is just kind of the way that I do it. You can do it to your own preference as well if you're pretty savvy in the kitchen. But normally I use my finger. I try to tuck in my fingertips so I'm not chopping off any fingers or anything or nails. And it just kind of seesaw down a little bit just to get it sliced. Thin slices, razor thin slices. Again, this is just the way that I like to do it. And then I'll start to mince all these slices together, as you see here. So you can see that they're pretty, pretty thin in size. I'm just going to break them apart a little bit so you can see, put that on the knife so I'm not hurting anyone here. You can see the little slices here. Also, garlic is very kind of oily and pungent. It's amazing. Like I said, I love it. And that's what it's so great in this recipe for those reasons. But just know that afterwards your fingers might smell like garlic for a while. So just be sure to wash your hands. So then I just kind of, like I said, no real supported reason for why I do this. This is just kind of how I go about mincing the garlic, until I get it to the consistency of being I would say coarse, coarse chunks maybe. Not to the point where it's like a paste, but you still want it to be to the point where people aren't chewing on garlic or anything. Huge pieces of garlic, I should say. Okay. I think I'm going to go one more mince through, just get through that. And this is kind of the consistency you want. It's pretty rustic. I don't try to do anything super uniform or anything. If you're, like I said, savvy in the kitchen and want to make things perfect, by all means, I encourage you to do so. But I tend to be one of those people in the kitchen that I just fly by the seat of my pants and I just do the best I can. Okay, so I'm going to put this on the side so you can just see the comparison there. This is the minced garlic. There, get that all over there. Again, garlic, love it, but it is a little messy, so you'll probably have some garlic on your fingers afterwards. So I'm just going to rinse off. Okay, so now I'm going to roughly chop the escarole. So I showed you what the escarole looked before, but I'll show you again. So I have it in this paper, a towel. I know it's super gorgeous, right? But the purpose why I do that is because of to keep it actually good longer. So you can see that I rinsed it and then I rolled it up like this. It's still a little damp, but you get the idea for the purpose of the wrapping in a towel. It normally dries it out a little bit more. It's not as damp normally when you do it this way. And it's a really good way to preserve greens because I don't know about anyone else, but greens are some of the veggies that fall off the wagon for me because they just go bad so quickly. So when you get the escarole, you could see that it's in big leaves, kind of like this. This one actually is particularly small for some reason, but normally they're a little bit longer and you can kind of, put them together like this. So what I do is I pull them apart. I rinse them in the sink. And so, pull them apart to these individual sizes, rinse them in the sink, and then I'll wrap it in the towel like I had showed you before, how they were wrapped. And then that can normally keep them good for a decent amount of time. And I think that a lot of times when recipes tend to feel more expensive, it's because, that's an ingredient that we'll only use once or whatever, and then it goes bad. So then you're kind of throwing money or throwing food in the trash, and that's just not ideal. So finding good ways to store it could be very helpful here. So particularly for these leafy greens, rinse them, wrap them in the towel. If you want to put them in a Ziploc bag, you can too after that. Sometimes I use it pretty quickly, so I don't necessarily always put it in a Ziploc bag, but that's just kind of my method of storing them. And it should keep longer than if you were just to keep it in without any sort of container or anything. So just a method to kind of save money in that sense. Again, if you don't really want to chop up garlic, I just love fresh garlic, you can buy minced garlic already minced, but it is more expensive. So that's why I normally go fresh because it's cheaper. And also I just feel it's more flavorful sometimes. So anyway, so this is pretty much all the prep work you have to do, the escarole and the garlic. So garlic is pretty much there once I kind of finish the rest of these, but for the escarole, these are pretty small leaves, right? So, for these, I would honestly probably just cut down the middle of them all. See how I kind of line them up right here. I apologize, I don't have the best manicure right now, but we're, dealing with it. So I kind of line them up and then I'll just cut down the middle. You can even cut off some if you want to, and up to you. I kind of tend to use the ugly parts of the produce, but if you want to cut off the tips, you can. But I'm trying to use as much of the product as I can. So, so then I'll just kind of bunch them all together. Again, this is just kind of my preference of doing it. And then I'll do maybe 1-inch chunks. You can do bigger or smaller, but this is just, again, my preference when it comes to beans and greens. I like to have it to be a little bit hearty. Okay. So see how they kind of like are ribbons now? Once you saute them, you know, it'll obviously wilt a little bit and it won't be as like long and lanky. But this is just kind of how I like to prepare my escarole for sauteing and everything. So between the garlic and the escarole, these are the only two things that you really need to prep. Like I have my cans of beans on the side and my bone broth and everything, but ideally this is like really it. You can add more to it if you want to add some onion or shallots or, you know, more like variety of greens like kale or something like that. But truly, like this is the only prep work you need. So now we're going to hop to kind of like throwing it all together, and I can walk you through that as well. And we can go from there.
All right, now we're gonna put everything together for the greens and beans. So the first thing you're gonna do is just put a couple tablespoons of avocado oil or grapeseed oil in the pan. I tend to use those two types of oils because they have a lower smoke point and they are high in the unsaturated fats too. So olive oil is a great option as well, but it just doesn't take on heat very well. It's more of like a finishing oil. So I use avocado oil and grapeseed oil for this. And my pan is already hot, so I'm just going to add in the garlic. And you just want to saute that for about 30 seconds. So garlic does burn pretty easily. It does not take much to just kind of saute it, get it softer, kind of bring about that nice garlicky aroma. And I'm just going to grab a spoon really quick. So I'm just going to toss this around a little bit. Like I said, 30 seconds, that's about it. And then we're going to add the escarole, which is going to saute for then 5 minutes. Sauteed garlic is probably one of my favorite cooking smells ever. It just smells so amazing. It makes the house smell good, and I just love it so much. And also, I'm not doing it right now, but normally I have some sort of music playing in the kitchen. So I invite you to do that as well, because that makes it way more fun. Also, I see my puppy here who's not supposed to be in the kitchen begging, but we'll let it slide this time. So it's been a few seconds, like around 30 seconds. I'm kind of speeding it up for the purpose of the video, but then you put in the escarole, which I have a huge amount of right here. This is that whole head actually that I was telling you all about. So we're going to let that saute for about 5 minutes. And it's going to wilt down a lot. So no worries. It seems like a lot, but it'll wilt down quite a bit. So I'm just going to toss this around really quick. And then I'm going to saute this for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and add in some of the other ingredients. Okay, so sorry this is shaky, but you can see how significantly all that escarole really wilted down, even just being in here for like less than 5 minutes. So it definitely goes down a bit. All right, next we're going to add the bone broth. I have actually 2 different containers I'm using this for. It calls for about a quart, I believe, of bone broth. Well, or chicken stock. And you can use, if you're plant-based, you can definitely use like a vegetable stock. But I like to use the bone broth, like I said, for the protein. And I think it's just a little bit more like flavorful too. So then you're going to bring this to a simmer for about 20 minutes. And then we'll start adding in the beans and kind of finish things up. If you're, like I said, if you want to use different leafy greens, kale, spinach, they're all good sources. Kale tends to be a little bit hardy. So if you want to break it down a little bit more, you can actually physically massage kale, like just with your hands, and it breaks it down for you. So that way it's not going to be as hardy even when you cook it. So we're going to press pause right now and then add in the beans and finish things up. All right, next I'm going to add in the beans and then also with the bean water, since I'm using the organic and low sodium cannellini beans. Just made a mess, but that's okay. So I added it in all together, like I said, because I chose the low sodium product. But you don't have to, if you don't buy the low sodium product, that's fine. You can just rinse the beans and maybe add a little bit more of the broth to just make it a little bit more in ratio with like having enough liquid and everything. So just let those reheat, let those all heat up together. You don't need to let it boil for too much longer, and then we can serve.